it out. So, Andy, so much to talk about. I actually would like to start out. Well, we'll talk about your journey, but before that, I have a question for you. Under languages, you have Thai Chinese. Tell us a little bit about that.
So, so it's a common misconception actually for people who don't know the real world of intelligence. And I know some of you probably have connections either with folks in military intelligence or possibly national security intelligence. And Hollywood makes it out like we become these fluent master linguists, when that just simply isn't true. The reality is that we learn a very basic and almost intentionally uh, incomplete form of a language when we go to speak a foreign language, because we're supposed to look like we're not native. So when we travel, they give us all sorts of access to languages, and they bring us up to speed very quickly on basic level or elementary level proficiency. Because when you're when you're an intelligence officer in a foreign country, you don't want to speak the language, the local language, too well. Because if you speak it too well, you're actually going to trigger distrust in the same people who you're trying to gain trust with. So you actually want to
Interesting.
speak a low level language with an American accent, and then that actually wins you more favor than if you were to speak the local language with perfect fluency.
Wow, that did not know that. And that's going to be probably a statement I'll say a lot during this hour. So, Andy, if you don't mind, walk us through your journey. You started out in the Air Force, right? And just wanted to hear that and have the team kind of get a little bit insight into you before becoming this internet
Yeah,
sensation.
yeah, no, absolutely. So I'm actually going to jump forward quite a bit, Ian.
Sure.
I'll sugarcoat the back end. But I actually feel very kind of lucky and privileged to be talking to you all, because when I left CIA, the first civilian job I ever held was actually in IT program management with a Fortune 7 company, CVS.
Awesome.
Yeah, I worked with CVS Health in their implementation department. So I was actually a program manager there. It's where I got my teeth and cut my chops or cut my teeth and got my chops with the program management world. But to go back, I graduated from high school in a rural Pennsylvania town. So if anybody knows what it's like to be surrounded by people that you don't look like, then that's exactly where I went to high school. And then because I was a brown guy from Pennsylvania, I ended up actually getting a really sweet scholarship to a school in Colorado. I went to the Air Force Academy. I had to work hard to get there, yes, but it certainly helped that I was ambiguously brown and everybody else in front of the senator that day was very Caucasian. And then I went into the military academy. I did not belong in the military, as you can probably tell from my look and my feel. I'm not totally I'm actually in Mexico right now, everyone. I'm spending time with my family in Mexico. That's not my house wall. I wouldn't pick yellow for my normal home. I also wouldn't pick these turquoise colors for my normal day-to-day feng shui. But since we're on a family vacation and since we're down here, we're doing part work and part family vacation. Whenever you have a client who calls you into a tropical paradise, that's a very easy client to say yes to. So that's part of what we're doing down here too. But after going through the military academy, I got my commission into the Air Force. I became a space and missile officer with the United States Air Force, which that was in 2003. So for those of you who were working or possibly in college then, 2001, obviously Iraq and Afghanistan spun up. 2003, there was a big push to send more money towards the Army and the Marine Corps. So the Air Force actually supported some of that push by transitioning officers into more strategic mission planning and mission operation roles. So that's one of the reasons I got kind of caught in that push. And that's what put me into space and missiles. It was not because I was a smart student. It's not because I was a good student. It's because they just needed more people to hold nuclear weapons. And I was somebody who had tested high enough that I could memorize a 16-digit alphanumeric. And it's very boring stuff. It's not as sexy as you might think. But that's how I ended up having a top secret clearance. I ended up having what's known as a special compartmented information, SCI clearance, that was cleared for nuclear weapons discussions. And with a Cat 6 TS SCI, that was, and then 2 languages under my belt, that was kind of what teed me up for the CIA. It's then tapped me on the shoulder in 2007 and asked me if I knew what I wanted to be when I grew up. And that's how I ended up at CIA.
Wow. So I know there's not a lot you can discuss in terms of details in the CIA, but I'm interested to know what are some of the skills that you came out with that you didn't have before you went in?
It's a great question, actually. So it's another, let me just kind of myth bust another myth. There's actually a great deal that we can talk about when we leave CIA. It's really interesting how often I realize folks don't know what questions to ask because the movies make it sound like we're not allowed to talk about anything. In fact, we're allowed to talk about a whole lot of things, but there's a very narrow area that we're not allowed to discuss. And that area is current intelligence sources and current intelligence collection methods. Those 2 things are the hard no. I also have some other stipulations just because I was an undercover officer in my operational history. So a lot of my undercover work, because it was not in my true persona, still remains classified and confidential. But when it comes to most of my experience and most of my time there, you might be surprised what questions you can ask that I can answer. But to get to your point,
Beautiful.
Ian, some of the things I came out with that I didn't have before I went in, honestly, they're mostly they're mostly social skills that are kind of unfair and awkward. I mean, that's the way to put it. I know how to lie. I was trained how to lie. Everybody else has to learn how to lie from the school of hard knocks. You get caught, so then you change the way you lie. I was taught to do that differently. I was actually taught how to tap into like the inner mind of people who have narcissism, people who have very strong egos, people who are especially hard to work with. Those are some of the skills that we're looking for, or some of the skills that they teach us, because when you're looking to recruit a foreign intelligence source, they're not usually normal, healthy-minded people. Most people who have access to secrets, or most people who are in high power positions, are actually a little messed up in the head. They were beaten as kids, they cheat on their wives, they have substance and drug abuse issues. Like, they're not normal people. So it's really funny because you kind of get recruited into the CIA because you're decent at working and being friends with normal people. And then you find out inside the CIA that your job is almost exclusively focused on jackasses and idiots.
So, segue from that.
I have follow-on questions. I just don't want to ask them here in this group.
Yeah, exactly.
Sounds like our job a little bit. Just kidding, just kidding. No, but I do have a follow-up to that question to that though. When you are in that position and you have to deal with people that you think are not really that okay, maybe lower ethics or in or other not as great personalities, how do you work through that to get past it so that you can still continue the working relationship? Because that's your job, right? That's important to carry on and get what you need. So I feel like that we can certainly use that skill set as well. So how do we learn that skill?
So Kimberly, it's a fantastic question. And it's actually funny because when I left CIA and I got into project management with CBS Health, what I discovered is that I knew nothing about project management. I was a mission manager. So I knew how to run a mission, but I knew nothing about how to run a project. And I thought that they were 2 very different things until, yeah, you're shaking your head, Kimberly, because you realize they're actually very much the same thing. Running a foreign intelligence operation or running a mission in the field is really just a fancier way of saying running a project or running a program. So what I discovered is that when there's 2 things I would recommend right away. So first, when you're working with people who are difficult to work with, or when you're working with people who don't appreciate or understand your role. And let's be honest, as PMs, everybody hates you. Everybody hates you. Nobody wants to hear from you because you're either telling them that something is running late, or you're asking them for a status which they haven't given you because they already know something is running late, right? Something's either over budget or behind schedule. So nobody really likes talking to a PM. So then we become reliant on other PMs and the one or two high achieving people in the different offices that we have to work on. And if your experience has been different than that, that's awesome. I'm very jealous of you, because in my experience, that was basically how everything worked. Nobody wanted to hear from me, and the one person who didn't want to hear from me, I always had bad news. So that's just kind of how it went. But what I discovered is that, you know, everybody out there, everybody on every different vertical that you're supporting, whether it's budgets, whether it's software development, whether it's third-party management, whether it's implementation, whoever it is, they all are trying to do what they believe is the right thing. And maybe you've heard the term noble intent before. Maybe you've never heard the word noble intent before, but that carried me a long way in the field, and it carried me a long way when I got out of the field. Working with all types of people. It didn't matter how hard-nosed, stressed out, alcoholic, or irresponsible they were. Everybody was trying to do the thing that they thought was the right thing to do. So noble intent is the first kind of thing that I would encourage you to lean into. And then the second thing that I would encourage you to lean into is staying laser focused on the mission. If there's one thing nobody can debate with, nobody can argue and nobody can debate with, the fact that you have been given a very specific mission objective. We're supposed to bring on this client on this date. Everybody knows that, right? That was dictated down by the CEO or the CTO or the CFO, but everybody's working towards that same thing. When you start debating the finer points about, you know, commitments and who said what and when requirements were due and what requirements were given and how that's different from the requirements that they're asking for now, or changes to scope or even scope creep, people will argue those things all day long, but everybody's on the same page when it comes to what's mission success. So if you can stay focused on mission success and keep conversations focused on mission success while also assuming noble intent, all of a sudden it changes the dynamic when you're working with, you know, difficult people. Great question, Kimberly. Does that answer the question?
I told you she would ask a hard question, Andy.
I don't think that was particularly hard. No, but thank you. That was great. You're absolutely right. I think sometimes it's about our perspective in coming into the conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, and I mean, that's what's hard. What's hard is that when people don't respect your role, it's really natural for you not to respect their role. When, you know, they push back on you, you start to think that they're incompetent, or you start to think that they're intentionally disruptive, or you start to think that they're irresponsible. You've all thought it. It's okay. We all think horrible things about other people. They think horrible things about you too. So, you know, let's grab a freaking ukulele and sing Kumbaya. We're all on the same page there. The difference is when you can be the person who assumes noble intent first, you gain a specific advantage because you don't ask anyone else to change. When you're the person who changes first, you kind of take control of the situation. Other people don't even realize they're giving you control because they think that they're winning because they don't have to change. Anybody who has children know exactly what I'm talking about. Children throw a temper tantrum. They don't want to brush their teeth. They don't want to eat dinner. They don't want to go to bed. They feel like they have a choice, not even realizing that they really don't have a choice. So you and I, as parents, we might flex a little bit, and then the kid thinks they won, and we know that we've actually won, and then you go on with your life. It's the exact same way when you work with really, really stubborn or difficult to work with people. If they're not willing to change, that's fine. You can change and work around them and then bring them along whether they like it or not.
Hey, Andrew, I got a quick question. What was your most successful project that you've seen executed or mission, right? That could also be interesting. And what were the key ingredients that you think made that happen?
Yeah, so Ernesto, that's another really good question. So actually, you know, it's funny. Let me take a quick hiatus from that for just a second. This meeting started at 12 minutes after the hour. And I think it normally starts at 10 minutes after the hour. and there's like a prep time in advance. So when Ian sent me the invite, it said that this started at 1 o'clock, or 1 o'clock my time in Mexico. So I was ready 1 minute before 1 o'clock to jump in and just start this thing. And then I found out later on that there was actually a change in time. About a week ago, I was on the phone with a publishing company, a mainstream American publisher, book publisher, one of the top 5 publishers. And I came in 1 minute before the meeting was supposed to start, and then boom, all of a sudden we jumped into a meeting with like 25 people on the phone. And the publisher joked about how easy it is to have publishing meetings now because everybody just shows up on time. Whereas in the past, people would come in 5 minutes late, they'd leave 10 minutes into it to take a phone call, and it was always like, you never knew who was going to hear you say what. And I bring that up because we just closed a deal on a memoir. So I just had a big top 5 publisher buy rights to my memoir. And my memoir is about exactly thank you very much. But it's about exactly what you're asking about, Ernesto. What was like the most high impact, most successful mission that I've ever run? And without breaking the NDA that I have with the publisher, essentially, I was part of a mole hunt. A mole is a spy who works inside your organization. So in 2010, 2011, we had a spy working inside CIA, and that spy was working for a foreign country. And nobody knew who it was, but we were very confident that there was somebody who had come on the inside and who was giving secrets and information out from within. Everybody kind of fell under scrutiny who was in the office that we suspected was trying to penetrate CIA. So every country in the world basically is represented by an office. Russia has its own office. North Korea has its own office. France, Germany, the UK, they all have their own office. So we believe that we had been penetrated by a foreign country. So that office, the office of that foreign country, came under heavy, heavy scrutiny. And that's bad because when the office comes under scrutiny, basically all operations stop. So to put that kind of in terms of like a football game, one team turns into all defense and there's no offense. And that's a bad news situation for us, because if everything comes to a stop, if all operations come to a stop, then we're just making ourselves even more vulnerable. I was in a completely different office, totally off the grid, doing counterterrorism stuff. Like, I mean, look at me. I go to dirty places and I do the dirty things that other people don't want to do. So they called me in because I had no experience, no footprint, and no history working with that country. And then all of a sudden I found myself by myself working an operation that I knew nothing about. And the way that it worked out, Ernesto, in the long run, the reason that we had success was because we were able to start working with people that had multiple different disciplines. So we started cross-pollinating disciplines. I was the field officer. We found an analyst. We found a linguist. We found an open source specialist. We found a tech ops specialist. We brought all these people together who came from various different organizations and had no experience working against this particular country. So they all came in kind of fresh and new. We were all essentially kind of dumb together. But inside the fact that we didn't have any preconceived notions, we were able to come up with some very creative and innovative new ideas as a group. And it was that innovation that we brought that was actually faster to implement than the mole could disassemble. So we were able to pivot and move very quickly because we had no background knowledge and essentially no background biases about how operations should be run. And we were able to stay one step ahead of the mole. And then about 6 years later, the mole was caught and captured and arrested in Virginia. And it was a good news story from there. But it only recently became declassified because it took almost 10 years for the Department of Justice to close the case and release it to the public.
Wow. That's an amazing story.
I wish I could give you more details, but we don't have quite enough time. But yeah, I owe a
We'll
lot of
read
that
it in the memoir.
When's it coming out?
Yeah, so it should, I mean, it should be published in a long time. It takes like a year and a half for a book to hit the shelves. But we'll talk again. Ian, I'll happily come talk to you guys again when it hits the shelves.
No worries, no worries. Yeah, so guys, love to open it up to the group here. Please ask questions. Andy is super hard to get a hold of, as you can imagine. After that video with Lex, you had 6 million views on just that one. So he has become an international sensation. So please ask your questions now. We might get Andy back maybe in a year if we're lucky. So now is the time.
While you guys are thinking of your questions, there is one lesson I kind of want to make sure that I share about risk management specifically. So CIA teaches us that there's two kinds of risks. There's real risk, and then there's perceived risk. And it's really important to understand that there's two types of risk, because most of us just refer to risk in one way. Most people just refer to risk as if it's one thing. In fact, it's two things. Let's start with perceived risk. Perceived risk is all the things about risk that cause you some kind of emotional reaction: fear, guilt, shame, whatever it might be. If there's an emotional reaction to the decision in front of you, to the risk that you're considering, there's a really good chance that that risk is actually a perceived risk. So perceived ties to emotional behavior or emotional responses. Real risk is the opposite. Real risk is risks that actually carry a statistically relevant chance of occurring. Real risk is based in logic or based in something that has to do with a measurable outcome. Not the same as perceived risk. Perceived risk is emotional, real risk is logical. So what happens is, because most people lump risk together, when they're considering a risk, or when somebody poses a risk, or when you recommend a risk to someone else, they have this emotional response and they just say no, because they become afraid, or because they become confused, or because they don't really understand it. They don't even realize that they're reacting to a perceived risk. It could be a low likelihood of anything bad happening. There could be a very high gain, low risk scenario that's being posed, but they don't realize it because they're having an emotional response. The same thing can happen to you. Somebody might pose a risk to you, whether it's changing a timeline, or whether it's a move to a new department, who knows what. You're going to have a reaction to the risk. That first reaction, I want you to understand, is a perceived risk. It doesn't necessarily mean that the risk is even a real risk. Well, it's only after you take the time to think it through and start asking yourself, what's the probability of the bad things that I'm afraid of actually happening? What's the true downstream impact of the bad thing that I'm afraid of happening? When you start counting it, you start measuring it, you start realizing that the risks that most people react to are not even real risks, right? A perfect example is driving a car. Statistically, you have a very high chance of being in a car accident. Statistically, if you haven't looked it up, you should look it up, because you have a very high chance of statistical relevance in a car accident. But my guess is that most of you get in cars all the time and you don't feel afraid. That's because your perceived risk and your real risk are out of whack, right? You don't feel any emotional fear, even though the real risk is actually there. And then vice versa, when you read a news story about gas prices increasing, you get scared. Oh my gosh, gas prices are increasing. They've already gone up 12 cents. When you start to do the real math and you realize that you only have a 10-gallon tank, and that a 12-cent increase amounts to, an extra $1 that you're paying at the pump, all of a sudden the risk becomes much less scary, because you are all in the kind of profession where $1.20 once a week isn't going to kill you. But you still feel that pressure of, is the economy going to collapse, right? This is the difference between perceived and real risk. And because the world thrives in this, in perceived risk, the media feeds perceived risk. People talk about perceived risk. Your parents, your brothers, your sisters, your friends all get wound up and stressed out and anxious about perceived risks, when in fact real risks are what true professionals focus on. And if you can stay focused on the real risk, you'll be able to bring confidence and kind of a level head to any situation.
So to follow up to that, Andy. Oh, go ahead, Sankar.
So I have a question, Andy. So when you think about the real risk or the perceived risk, how do you go about in your head or in your brain on a daily basis regarding mitigation plans? Like, do you keep thinking, oh, if this happens, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that? Can you talk a little bit about your process of how you mitigate either of the risks, whether it's written or not written, but in your head?
Yeah, so that's also kind of a two-part strategy, right, Sankar? So the first thing is, if you remember what I just said, I said it in passing, but I'll say it one more time to be clear. The first thing you will always feel is perceived risk. There's no way to stop feeling it. You will always feel it. You will always have an emotional response. So the first step, Sankar, to mitigating a risk is to recognize that the first risk that you feel isn't real. So you have to give yourself time to let that process in your own brain, in your own system. I'm going to get kind of heady here and I might lose some of you, but for those of you who are really like cerebral people, you might like this. The human brain has two hemispheres. It has a left brain and a right brain. Most of us know that. If you've ever read like a People magazine or a Men's Health journal, you know there's two halves to the brain. But what people don't realize is that whenever you're making a decision, the process by which you assess risk actually happens in both hemispheres. In both hemispheres. One hemisphere takes a portion of the data, processes that data, and then passes it to the other hemisphere. And then that other hemisphere has to do a little bit additional processing before it passes it back to the other hemisphere. So there's this ping pong match that actually makes decisions about risk a whole brain decision. Not like making music or doing a math problem that only uses one hemisphere. It actually takes both hemispheres to make a sound decision. So you want to understand that whenever something triggers you, whenever a risk presents itself, you have to give yourself somewhere between 30 seconds and 45 seconds so that your emotions happen and your logical side of your brain can actually catch up to be at the same place. So if anybody who has had any kind of emergency, you've cut your finger, you've busted your lip, your daughter or your son fell down the stairs, you freak out, and you freak out hard for like a solid 3 to 7 seconds. And then after that, your logical brain starts to catch up and you can actually assess the damage that's been done. And you're like, oh, they fell down the stairs, but nothing's broken. Everything's working. I cut my finger, but it's not bleeding too much. I don't see like the bone isn't sticking out. I think I'm okay. You've been through these experiences before. What's actually happening is your logical brain, your left brain, is catching up with your emotional right brain as they share information back and forth. So when it comes to mitigating a risk, give yourself that time. Give yourself a solid, 7 freakout seconds, and then a solid 30 to 45 more logical seconds so that your entire brain has had a chance to assess the risk. Once that happens, then you should start writing emails. Then you should start making phone calls. Then you can start actually measuring, well, what's the real impact of this risk, right? I just lost $20,000 to my project. What's the real impact going to be? And then by the time you escalate that risk to someone, you'll have already been able to outline, you'll be able to prevent them from freaking out because you won't have freaked out. You'll be calm and stable and steady by then. And you'll be able to propose a real statistical, logic-based mitigation plan or strategy that other people wouldn't have produced because they will have reacted in an emotional way. Does that answer your question, Sankar?
Yes, yeah, it answers my question. And the fact that you said that both sides of the brain are involved is very new to me. I've not read or heard about this. So thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, I have a question, Andrew. So this is about the value, like if you're talking about risk, one of the things that we deal with as far as kind of risk is guarding people's health information. But one of the things I think that's changed as a society and continues to evolve is our acceptance of pretty much everything. You can live any kind of life. So with that context, what is the value of privacy? And is it the risk that we think that it is? If we're so accepting, if I can be very honest and open about my mental health issues, or whatever kind of deep dark secrets that people used to keep in under cloak and dagger before, what about today? Is privacy really all that valuable, or are we okay to be more open than we've ever been?
Yeah, so that's a super enlightened question, Dinesh. And part of the reason I've become relatively popular on the internet is because I tell people the things that they don't like to hear. So Dinesh, I don't feel like you have an answer. I feel like you're just asking an open question, but I am certain that what I'm about to say is going to piss off half of the people who are listening right now. So basically, there is no such thing as privacy anymore. Privacy doesn't exist. Any semblance of privacy that you feel like you have is absolutely like a personal internal bias. You really don't have any kind of privacy of the type that was originally defined, at least not by the American Constitution. Just to give you a few examples, you have, of course, you have, your personal health data, your personal payment information, right? Your PPI and your PHI, all that stuff is supposed to be private. It's legally held as private information. So that's important because it means that if there's ever a legal dispute, you can go to court and leverage litigation against the fact that somebody accessed your private information. So that's good. But essentially, that's what the law actually promises. It promises you a fair trial when your privacy is violated and you can prove that your privacy was violated. In the world that we live in, the new and most valuable natural resource out there is actually people's personal information. That's why Google and Apple and WhatsApp and Venmo, that's why they all harvest your personal information. The way that they can do it legally, again, is because they don't associate your direct name or your direct, what's called an identifier, your personal social security number, your personal home address. They don't openly associate that number in the same data set as whatever piece of information they're collecting. Any of you who work in SQL know that it only takes one query to create a pivot so that you can connect two pieces of information from two separate databases. That's exactly the workaround that's used in the privacy world. So Dinesh, your credit card number doesn't exist in the same data set as your first and last name. Your first and last name exist in a different database. But when somebody queries both databases, then they can put the two together. Google is a great example. They use avatars. So they'll look at everybody on this call. If you do Google searches or if you use Google Maps, they'll actually harvest the information that's being collected from your searches, and they'll put it all into one large data set. And then within that data set, they'll normalize the data to get multiple different avatars. So now they won't call it Kimberly or Garrick or Tina. They'll call it Avatar 236, Avatar 615, Avatar 812. And those avatars just happen to fit your personal behavioral profiles. Female, certain age, male, certain age, likeliness of education, likely address, and then they'll be able to populate that with how much money you spent on shoes, how much time you spent on a banking website, whether or not you do searches that have to do with childcare, or whether or not you do searches that have to do with date night, right? That's how they get around the privacy thing. But because all the data lives out there, it's just a question of connecting the data with customized search terms. And that's what really big investigators get paid for, because they're able to, how is it that FBI can use Apple data to convict a felon? Because the information has been harvested, and they're able to go back and put it together to make a case, a compelling case. So if you actually want to have private information, you can't do that in a digital world. The only way to keep that truly private is to never let it cross-pollinate into the digital world.
Would you say that you could create a digital you that is not anywhere close to you?
You can. That's a fantastic question, Dinesh, and that's actually what I advise to most of my high net worth clients, is that you go out and you create a completely new avatar. You buy a phone and you create a new login for that phone, and then you actually can, I recommend to them that they turn that phone over to their personal assistant, who's usually like 24 years old. And then that personal assistant uses that phone like a 24-year-old most of the time, until their actual boss needs the phone to do whatever their 67-year-old very wealthy person does. And now it confuses the avatar. And that's the closest thing you can come. Again, is the private data still accessible? Yes. But now what we're doing is we're making it misattributable. Misattributable means attributed to the wrong source. It's still not hidden. That's non-attributable. It's misattributable, which means attributed in the wrong way.
So besides commercialization of your data, what is the actual risk of an avatar being created around you?
So this is a great question when you think of perceived risk versus real risk. What you just asked is the question nobody freaking asks when they decide to go on a rampage on Twitter about privacy. The truth is, who cares? Who has your data? I mean, honestly, if Google is going to advertise, my cousin, I love my cousin, but my cousin to me is a little bit crazy. My cousin is a former triathlete, female, Latina, very spunky, very cute, very pretty. She loves the fact that Google constantly advertises clothes that she's going to like. Like, she just opens up her phone and her notifications are an advertisement for a new pair of shoes. And as soon as she sees them, she's like, oh, they're cute. She loves the fact that she gets yoga pants and she gets yoga mats and she gets whatever else. She loves it. And I'm like, do you not understand how finely pegged your avatar is, that they can hit you with advertisements that you love? Like, you are very well known to them. She doesn't care. She's like, let me have it, because it saves me hours of shopping to know that someone's just going to tell me and give me a coupon for the thing that I want. So the real risk here, Dinesh, the real risk is that you are going to have a very convenient life when more people know your private information. The chances of someone actually using it to hack you or steal your identity or whatever else, that's the kind of information that people use when they orchestrate a theft of an identity does not come from Google. It does not come from Apple. It doesn't come from these mega companies. It comes from some, piddly dink third-party company that you accidentally signed up for when you tried to win that free condo when you were 27 years old. Those are the farms that end up getting personal identities stolen.
Right.
So yeah, great question. Perceived risk versus real risk. We can complain about it all we want, but the only thing we're really risking is a very convenient and transparent civilization.
I like your idea of confusing the algorithm. Yeah, it's brilliant. I was wondering, just before we kind of run out of time, any other techniques or tools that just jump off of you right now that are kind of really cool or interesting that you use maybe in your project management life? I don't mean a project management tool, but just techniques or tools that that you're using that jump off. Yeah.
Yeah. So let me give you, I think you're asking Ernesto about some hacks. Let me give you a couple of hacks that I use. I've only got about 3 minutes in before I need to jump to another call.
Sure.
So the first hack that, again, half of you are going to hate, half of you are going to love, you got to get off coffee. Coffee is the worst form of caffeine that you can possibly put into your system. And most of the coffee that you buy from a store, especially if it's a chain store, is artificial caffeine that's being produced most likely somewhere in Asia or Latin America, and then being artificially added to the beans. So if you need caffeine, look to something like green tea or black tea, or red tea is caffeine free, but look to black tea, white tea, or green tea for your caffeine fix. I also strongly recommend people look at alternatives to coffee altogether. Cacao is a fantastic alternative to coffee if you haven't looked at it. CBD, believe it or not, is a fantastic alternative to caffeine. If you haven't looked at microdosing CBD, it's really fascinating how it works. But these are alternatives that will save your digestive system from the acidic response, and also they'll save your chemical balance in your brain. Because what caffeine actually does is it suppresses the serotonin that makes you feel tired. It doesn't actually give you energy, it just suppresses the things that make you feel tired. So if you can switch that and actually get something that brings you energy rather than something that suppresses your tiredness, it's a much better solution. That's one hack I would recommend. The second one is if you drink a half liter of water in the first 30 minutes of the day, the whole day is better. And there's so many reasons why. The grossest reason is because you're going to have the most spectacular morning bowel movement when you have a half liter of water first thing in the morning. That's super valuable to a lot of us who are working at home and trying to manage life and kids. But then second to that, you're also actually priming your digestive system to maximize the energy that it takes from every meal that you eat throughout the day. Because what happens is over the course of an 8-hour night, your body dehydrates, your intestines, which are hydration intense, dehydrate, and the first thing that you put in your system in the morning, which for many people is usually coffee, is actually, it goes to like this grinding halt in your guts, which is what causes your guts to cramp and causes them to purge. It's kind of a 1-2 punch of bad things happening that make you feel a good way. And if you just replace the coffee with a half liter of water before you eat anything, you're going to have just an amazing day.
The chat disagrees. They're like, this is my one joy in
I'm
life.
here for free, so the chat can disagree all day long.
Yeah. Well, Andy, I know you need to drop off, but before you do, I'd love to encourage the folks here, if you can, let's give Andy a big round of applause. Thank you so much. This was super helpful. And on behalf of all of us here at UCLA, thank you. Best of luck with the book, Andy, and hoping we can get you back on, talk about more hacks and all these amazing things that you've learned in your journey.
Yeah.
Got it, Ian. Thank you.
Thank you.
Folks.
Thank you so very much.
Thanks,
Thank
buddy. Best of luck.
Thank you.
Talk soon.
Thank you, everyone.